So I'm going to start by kicking off our session with a brief passage from the ritual that I thought was actually really relevant here. So even if you haven't been through this particular rite of passage, these words should ring true for everyone. In times of happiness, a man needs a brother to rejoice with him. In times of sorrow, he needs a brother to console him. When he fails, he needs a brother to forgive him. And when he is alone, to offer him friendship. The ties of fraternal love are binding and holy. If you're in your last month as the VP of Finance, this likely wasn't the year that you thought you'd have. You probably had no idea that you're trying to be able to convince people to pay dues in a global pandemic. Really, none of us did, but now your jobs are the most important of all, helping your chapter weather the storm and come out better because of it. And for that, we thank you. Showing empathy in a time of crisis is one of the greatest gifts that you can offer in your role. But it's also a time to ensure that our standards stay strong and we remain competitive. In SigEp's history, our brothers have dealt with many different trials. Some were drafted into wars. Some chapters were closed and later reopened. And many chapters have stood the test of time, active for over 100 consecutive years. So we're proud of the work you do and know that we're going to persevere through this trying time as well. Brothers, tonight we have the honor to hear from Chris Bittman. Chris is a 1985 graduate of the University of Colorado and a brother from our Colorado Alpha chapter. Upon graduation, he served SigEp as a regional director, started 21 new chapters as an expansion director, and then completed his time on the headquarters staff as a director of chapter services. He's a Distinguished Alumnus Award recipient, and then was first elected to the National Board of Directors in 2001. In 2003, he was elected as the Grand Treasurer and re-elected every single conclave up until he was elected Grand President to serve the 2017-2019 term. After spending some time on Wall Street with Merrill Lynch and then serving as President and CEO of a San Francisco area investment firm, in 2004, he returned to his alma mater to become the first Chief Investment Officer. He is currently a partner, CEO, and CIO, overseeing more than $10 billion at Agility. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, Chris is going to share leadership lessons with you and stories from his SigEp and professional experience. And at the end, you'll have an opportunity to ask him some leadership-based questions before a facilitated discussion amongst your peers. If there's any reactions or questions that you have throughout the session, please feel free to add them to the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom window. But without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Chris.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, brothers. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you. You've got such a damn tough job right now. You know, I have 5 children, only one off the payroll. 2 kids that just graduated, one from the University of Colorado, one from the University of Oregon, and they're job hunting in this pandemic. 2 kids that are sophomores, our other set of twins this year that are at Auburn and University of San Diego. And I hear from them all the time. So I know how hard this is. What I hear from them, and I hear from other brothers around the country, is that our teachers don't know how to give online instruction. You feel like you're overpaying for something for what you're getting. The social aspect isn't the same anymore, you know, and it's easy to worry about your health and that of your family and friends. We're wrapped into this lowest common denominator where the biggest fool on your campus presents the biggest risk to everybody. And even though you may be doing all the right things to stay safe and careful and healthy, not everybody is, and that makes it tough. And every time somebody coughs, you think, you know, they've got coronavirus and they're going to give it to you. And so you probably feel a little ripped off. You know, this is not what college is supposed to be like. And you're right, it's not what college is supposed to be like. You know, you are part of a generation for which this virus represents a line in the sand. There's a before and there's an after. And the after will never be like the before. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have a more normal experience next year. But for some of you that are seniors, it's really hard to imagine ending like this. I watched my 2 seniors come home in March thinking they'd get to go back for their graduation ceremonies in May and June. And obviously that didn't happen. So it's tough. And I feel for you. And on top of that, you don't have an easy job. Because you've got to make sure things are fiscally healthy and sound, and that's just difficult. So I won't go long, but I wanted to give you just kind of a few thoughts on things that I think are important for VPs of finance and things that you can do. And burdens that you've got to bear. It's just, like I said, it's a tough job. So the first bit of advice would be, if you're turning over in your role here in the next month or so, you've got to know who your successor is going to be right now. You cannot be surprised at an election. You got to recruit the best guy for the job and get him interested and excited and coach him up, and then actively support his candidacy. And that's how healthy chapters do it. They have thoughtful succession plans. They don't get surprised the night of the election. Some of you have maybe more time to go, and others of you may have already turned over and you're still listening to coach up the other guy. But whenever I ask chapter leaders who's going to replace you, I'm much more confident in the chapters where the president or the vice president of finance has an answer for me. You need a depth chart. If you don't have a depth chart, your chapter is going to get behind. And so you've got to find a way to, regardless of where you are in your rotation in terms of your office, you've got to be coaching up the younger guys. The fact that you're here tonight when you've got plenty going on between classes and midterms and jobs and everything else tells me that you're serious about it, or even if you're just watching this after the fact, I appreciate that you're doing it. The job as president is tough, but your job, I think, is tougher in a lot of ways, because there is a bright fiscal line between a chapter living or dying. And it's your job to know, where that line is all the time. You've got to know how much you've got to collect in dues, how much you owe, how many men you have paying. It's really your job, I would say, not the chapter president's job, to ensure that your chapter survives the pandemic and thrives as you look further out. And if you're worried, you've got to ask for help. There are a lot of people that can be helpful to your ABC president or treasurer or chapter counselor or regional director or local alumni. But you've got to reach out. You don't want to get into a dire situation. And I hate to position it like this, but these are really tough times, and they put a lot of stress on a chapter financially and a lot of other ways. I used to talk a lot at Conclave and regionals, Carlson's, about SigEp needing heroes and leaders and champions. And it's never been more true than today. You've got to be the champion for your chapter's fiscal health. And it's hard. I know Zach can talk about what the National Fraternity's done to ease the burden, but at the end of the day, chapter brothers have to hold each other accountable. And that's what we're counting on you to do. And they're counting on you to do. And so how do you do that? First, your brothers need to know that you care about them, that you love them, that you have a tough job and that you need their help to be successful, that your very existence as a chapter depends on it. And that's a heavy burden to bear, but it's one that I suspect you are up for, or you wouldn't have been elected to your position. There are a couple CEOs of large Fortune 500 companies that have just started their jobs this year and started their jobs in the pandemic that have really, I think, exemplified that caring and focus. John Donahoe, who's the president and CEO of Nike, was asked about what advice he would give during a crisis. And he said, you got to show up, you got to be authentic, and you got to be transparent. And I think people appreciate that. They appreciate knowing that you're telling them the truth, even if the truth sometimes is tough. Carol Tomei is the new CEO of UPS, and she said, we need to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And that's really true, especially in your role, because of the impact that again, the finances have on a chapter, especially in a tough time. Zach mentioned that we've had tough times before, world wars, other health crises, other crises on campus, and so other times when the fraternity system and student organizations have really been tested. This is a unique one. But I think you will come out of this on the backside of this kind of a stronger person in a way. And I'll tell you a little bit at the end about what I think that means in terms of career type stuff. Winston Churchill said, before you can inspire with emotion, you must be swamped with it yourself. Before you can move their tears, your own must flow. And to convince them, you must believe yourself. And so it's not always about you, but it starts with you. And I'm hopeful that you can continue to kind of make progress and fight ahead again in this tough time. So I was at the grocery store last week. The woman in front of me was checking out, and she'd gotten 2 of these containers of Clorox wipes, which were like gold in March, a little less so today, but still in hot demand. And the cashier said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, you can only have one." And I could see her starting to tear up. She said, I was literally right, I mean, I was 6 feet behind her, but I was behind her. And she said she needed two because she was caring for a sick husband at home, and her daughter was caring for her sick grandchild in another house. And I felt for this woman. I said, "Look, can I buy one for her?" And the woman said, "Sure." She just can't buy two. So somehow that made it all legal, and she was able to get her 2 packages of wipes. But you hear stories like that all the time in this crisis, all over the world in the pandemic. This notion of shared interest ruling over self-interest. And for you guys, I would say that shared interest is setting standards. It's expecting brothers to meet those standards. It's holding them accountable and seeing your chapter thrive. And self-interest is, ignoring the issues or not holding your brothers accountable. And what I want you to be able to do is what I can do. I get to go back. This year, it's a virtual homecoming. It's not quite the same. But next year, I suspect we'll have a live in-person homecoming event, and I get to go back to my chapter. And I want that for you. I don't want you to go back to a place where there's not a chapter anymore, or they're not, your friends don't come back to your school. And so these are really tough times, brothers, and I feel for you. I can tell you that when you come out the backside of this, it really does create a grit and a toughness that's appreciated. If you get through these times successfully, there are firms that are going to want to hire you because of that. And I know it's a frightening time when you think about either graduating soon or in another year or so and graduating into this pandemic. And I'm watching my kids really slog it out, making all these contacts and trying to get out there and to try and interview by Zoom when it's really tough. And it's interesting, some people are asking them, so how did you finish up senior year? What did that look like? What lessons did you learn? And what I found out was that there were really significant lessons that they learned around, dealing with uncertainty and how to do that. So I don't want to go on. I know you all have a lot of important business tonight, but I wanted to at least tell you that I appreciate you and what you're doing. I know it's a really tough time. I have every confidence in you, as does your chapter. And it's okay to ask for help. It's much better to reach out and help. I'm personally happy to help to the degree that I can. I'm just, I'm an old guy. When they start calling you past something, you're an old guy. But reach out to me on LinkedIn, shoot me a note, let me know how things are going. Let me know what you want to do when you graduate. To the degree that any of us can be helpful with your job search in this tough time, we're always happy to do it. And so, Zach, with that, let me just stop there and turn back over to you.
Thanks, Chris. As I mentioned, towards the end of this, we'll have an opportunity to ask Chris any questions. So now is that time. Chris has a lot of really cool SigEp experience, but also a lot of really, really cool professional experience as well. So at this opportunity, if you have any questions for Chris, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. You can either send them to me privately if you choose, or you can post them publicly as well. Chris, I've got one to kind of kick us off here. At a time where we're struggling to kind of identify our value proposition as an organization, how do you, what kind of advice do you have for our executive boards on how to define that and encourage our brothers to kind of share that message so our brothers realize that this is a valuable experience for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. You got to remind people. You got to remind people what SigEp stands for, what your chapter stands for, what you stand for. You got to reach out to people. It's so easy in a time like this to let it go. There's no formal recruitment period, or there's no events, or this isn't how we've always done it. And the chapters that are going to be successful find a way to tell their story no matter what's going on. So I think it's not just telling people, hey, let's go tell our story. It's having a little session on it. Hey, at this meeting on Monday night, we're going to take the first 5 minutes, just remind everybody who we are and why we're here and how important it is to go out and tell that story to other people. And so that's what I would do. I think you got to practice. It's like any other sport in some ways. And I would say don't compromise. It's there's a lot of pressure now because you're thinking, gosh, we're losing people. We have people graduating, and it's so hard to get to know guys by Zoom. But that just means you got to step up your game.
I did get one question sent to me privately. How do you stay involved whenever you graduate? So how do you stay involved, I suppose, with SigEp whenever you graduate?
Yeah, great question. And Zach, you might have some thoughts on this too. And I know some of our other alumni brothers are probably more qualified to answer this. But the first notion is, one, you do stay involved. It's easy to send a note to headquarters and to say, hey, I'm now moving to this city. Is there a chapter nearby? I wouldn't presume that your involvement in any way needs to be limited to your chapter. And in fact, your best advice and counsel to people may be going to a different chapter where they haven't heard about your experience and what you're doing. And so I would say send a note to headquarters staff or reach out to the chapter that's wherever you're going to be and try and get involved in whatever way they need help. It might be mentoring a student or a chapter officer. It might be on the AVC, a lot of different ways. But Chuck, I don't know if you or Steve or Fred or anyone else has some other thoughts too.
Yeah, I would say also on my SigEp, there's now a way to indicate that you're interested in getting involved, and there's actually an infrastructure behind that sends the note to the district governor, who's primarily responsible for volunteers in a district and can help match up people with different needs that the district has. In some ways, I think because of COVID, we've got some new opportunities now, because it doesn't really matter where you are. You can help somebody who isn't necessarily a 20-minute drive from you. I think if you just get the word out that you're interested and stick with it until you start getting involved. And then once you get involved and show up and do your job, you'll find there's lots of other things that people look to you for. But the first one is just, I think, a matter of getting hooked up with some situation where they need you. That's at least my 2 cents.
Chris, this question may be a good one that we could take to committee, if you will, and discuss afterwards, but wanted to pose it here as well. What are ways to retain new members who may have joined the chapter in an expectation of a normal chapter life when things are socially distant and opportunities like this are limited? It's been difficult to display the value of brotherhood.
Yeah, maybe Zach, we do kick that one back to your next smaller group session. I would say one of the things you've got to remind people is this isn't a permanent situation. I'm in the investment business, and we spend a lot of time in investing in venture capital and investing specifically today in treatments and potential vaccines for coronavirus. And there's a lot more optimism than I would have expected, given how difficult this disease is to combat. But there are going to be, I'm pretty confident, vaccines available next year. Things could still be difficult and different in the fall because of people's acceptance of wanting to proceed with something like that. But we're going to get to a situation, I think, next summer and fall where the treatments are going to be such that the death rate and the hospitalization rate drop really dramatically. And as a result of that, people can feel safe going back to work, going back to restaurants, going back to other places. That doesn't mean that we'll be in the same kind of crowds or that we'll be mask free, but things are going to normalize, and they're going to normalize a little bit more on campus too as a result of that, because that's what people in my age group are worried about is, I don't want to die, right? And so they're hesitant to go out to do things. What campuses are worried about is they're worried about you getting sick and killing faculty and staff that are in an age group that are at higher risk than you are. That will change as we get into next fall in particular. And so I think, one, don't let people think because you're in it right now, it's always going to be that way. And two, you got to have some strategy, which you guys can talk about in your small groups, to bridge that.
Yeah, that'd be a great question for us to continue to hash out. And maybe you guys have better ideas on how to do this than we do. So after Chris departs here in a few, that's a great question for us to talk with each other about. Matt Gain from Pennsylvania Omega asked to come off mute and ask the question personally. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I have a question for you, Chris. So a problem that I'm seeing within my chapter is that a lot of brothers are skeptical about paying dues because we couldn't have social events or just regular operations as we could as a regular chapter. So how could we reinvest into our brothers to make sure that they're feeling justified in any sort of dues that they had to pay for this semester, next semester? Because we can't have social events. I'm trying to coordinate things that we could do off campus, go somewhere with all the brothers and have an activity and still feel like they're still getting their money's worth and that we're still reinvesting the money to get to us.
Yeah, look, I don't think I have any unique insight into that, Matt. I guess I would open it up for the group because I'm sure some of you are wrestling with the same issues and some of your chapters have found ways to address it. So let me kind of kick it back to the group on that.
I'll jump in and just share that, first of all, let me deal with my cat, which just got in the way. I'm working with a group that's a rebuilding chapter at Cal Theta Sac State. And in some ways, they had kind of a clean slate to work with because they were just starting the chapter when this all hit. So they have really reached out into the Balanced Man program and redoubled their commitment to that, and have we've had, because of coronavirus, we've been able to have people come in. I did a class on time management. Frank Butterfield did one on physical fitness. I can't remember all of them. We did one where we brought in somebody from the career that they were interested in to talk to everybody about their career, but also answer specific questions for each of the people. So I think the main suggestion I would have is brainstorm. What would be interesting and fun to do? The guys just found out there was a movie theater that would let them rent the theater out, and they had to sit socially distanced, but they got to pick their own movie and went and had a great time. They've just gotten some new members, so they're looking to meet the new members. And so I think part of it is to look for third-party COVID safe things to do that you can still do. It's probably not what you're going to find by looking at what you did last year, but start asking around for what other people are doing and how people are addressing this. And I'm surprised at how much they've found by just kind of going with a clean sheet of paper and saying, well, what could we do? And they've come up with quite a few. So they're doing rather well, actually, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's another great topic for us to be able to idea share on. We don't necessarily have all the answers here, but we do want to hear from you guys. Chris, I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we'll
rid of me
off into those groups, and then I'm kicking you out. No,
it's the real work. Okay.
One question that came in is related to the university's response for this, and maybe you can share some of your own professional experience here. Universities are not really providing long-term plans. Nobody has a magic crystal ball that we can look into and prepare for this, but somebody asked, what is your company doing to embrace this new normal and combat Zoom fatigue with your employees or clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. People do ask, what do you worry most about? If you had said to a business, my business, any business, you are going to have 100% of your employees go off site, you're not going back to the office again for a year or more, and they had said, so how long will that take to pull off? And we would have said, 6 to 12 months. We got to do all these committees together and all this planning. And it happened in 24 hours, right? So what I worry about is it's tough to build culture by Zoom and remotely and when people out in different places. I've got 52 employees. They are in New York and Austin and Denver. And the ones in New York have not come back in at all. The ones in Austin have started to a little bit, and in Denver we have a handful coming in. And what I'm most worried about are the people that are kind of millennials, for whom that office experience is really important culturally, and how you continue to maintain that. It's the same thing in the fraternity, right? And without kind of face-to-face contact, it gets a lot tougher to do that. So we've done a few things. One, we let people know we care, we give a shit. Pardon my language, it's now recorded and on tape, but really we love our employees and our partners, and we care about them. So we check in on them. We know that everybody's situation is different. Some people are at home and loving it, and they're in great shape and don't ever want to come back to the office. Some people are in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 small kids and a baby in New York, and they're not very productive, right? They can't wait to get out. And so it's being conscious of everyone's unique circumstances and situations. I bet you might not know that someone in your chapter today, just because it's so hard to get everybody together, has got somebody at home that's really sick from this. Or there may be other personal circumstances. So staying in touch with everybody individually is really, I think, important. You're right, universities are struggling with their long-term plans because this is so new to them. They want to so badly go back to the old way. One is because that's what they know, and 2 is because economically they have to, right? If they can't get you living in the residence halls and buying a meal plan and using the facilities on campus and charging full freight and having athletic events, they're in trouble. And so that's why they're so pressed to kind of get back to the normal way as fast as they can. It's going to come down to testing and availability of testing and the ability to isolate people that get sick. We've seen it in other countries, and we know that it can work, and we're just not there yet in the US. And so a little bit of a long-winded response, but I think you've got to let people know that you care about them, and you've got to empathize with them, and you've got to find a way to continue to keep them connected through this till we get past the other side to what is our new normal.
Absolutely. Chris, we thank you for hopping on and being a part of this experience. And whether they're here live or viewing afterwards, we appreciate you giving some time tonight to share some of your personal and professional experiences.
Thank you, my brothers. I really appreciate it. I'm grateful for y'all, and good luck. And I'll look forward to staying in touch.